Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday Melt with the 2MK team. I'm probably going to have a sound check in a moment, but we are, as always, playing Melty Blood, Type Lumina. You're free to join us. We're going to be rotating upward in, let's say, experience, skill, overtime. So, if you want to fight opponents who know clearly what they're doing and are strictly speaking stronger, move more toward the end of the stream to join it. And if you are a beginner yourself, we're all kind of like out in the pass space, so you can join in right away. And hopefully you'll be able to get some matches yourself. We're repeating what we did last week, basically understanding of some parts of neutral and some goals, while dealing with this game's many options that you have to get used to having. Some other stuff that's probably going to be happening is adjustment to the idea that while this game has very complex neutral, lots of different options, what you should do in any given situation tends to be just as binary as in any other game. Which is a good thing to start off with MASH, because while MASH is very powerful in many ways, playing the specifics of MASH neutral, or rather countering MASH neutral, isn't terribly hard. In most cases, you are hitting sweep or hitting 3C. And if neither of those things is likely to work, you might want to shield, but not really. If your character is like Noel and has basically the ability to combo from one of those into the other, you are in a really good place and should just do that. It is up to the MASH player to make it through, and she absolutely can, but we are starting from the perspective of our MASH player needing to learn how to do that. So, this is where we are today. Therefore, you're going to be seeing these two for a little bit as they are working on, easing each other into the game more as they go. We'll probably see quite a bit of adaptation and growth in strategy as these fights play out. But again, expect that if you hop in now, you might get to fight one of them, as everyone else should be on the back foot, basically. But if you would like to wait for opponents who are not doing this style of practice, then you can also jump in and just put yourself to back and wait for it. I'm not necessarily going to have a lot to say right away for that reason, and possibly just generally not through this stream, as everyone's goals are well defined, but the specifics of little bits of it aren't really something that I should be talking about too much. There's not a whole lot to bring up. People are getting used to stuff that they haven't had a lot of time to practice, and therefore working on their positions.
増し切りエライト最善はマジックサーキットファイト逃しません。まだまだこれくらいフェイタせーのこれくらいいくわよ。おとなしくしてね。リカバーあるわよ。やればいいんでしょ。全力で巻き上げます。脚力マックスこれくらいルーヌスカード4だ。
This is in fact another one of those situations where understanding the game turns it into something more similar to other games you already play. This is common in fighting games as a whole, but this one doesn't give you that impression at first because it has so many options that you feel that you're supposed to do something new, do something different. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's not how fighting games work for the most part. There's always more stuff to do, but the fundamentals of them are called fundamentals for a reason. They're basically repeat the same thing over and over and figure out how you like to do it with your own character. Generally, the thing you're trying to learn to do in games like this is how to use all these additional resources and options you're given in one way or another. But if you find yourself functioning without those, you can just level up later, as in any other game where you actually could level up abilities or skills. You don't have to start off by trying to learn to use any given thing, simply because you could just do without it until you are comfortable with doing the other things. The only difference is that you will find less people who are super interested in facing off with you when they already have mastered all those things. But, I mean, that's normal enough. So if you've got full bar, for example, and can't think of something to do with it, don't. Just recognize that your opponent who is using their bar is likely to win until you end up learning what to do with yours. There's nothing more to it than that. If you find that it's important, if you've mastered the rest of what you are doing, and if then decided, okay, I'm at my peak now, I don't know what else to do, then you can put some time and effort into learning, oh right, I have meter that I'm not using, I should use it to do more damage or something. Open your magic search. Fight. そこでバッシュ状況確認やダイブお倒れを下がりますつくや打ち払いまだまだや Without this particular tendency in fighting games, it would be difficult to enjoy as many of them as possible. And that's super important, obviously. After all, these games are mostly fun. They're doubly fun when you're playing against someone around your own level, and doing your best to keep up with them in whatever way. They're less fun if you try too hard to be something that you're not. But if you've got one game that you want to be really good at, obviously that's the thing you can become, a person who is very good at that one game. In which case you often need to have quite a bit more in terms of options and skills across multiple characters. But when you're in this spot, that's not really what you want. You just want to play this game's version of whatever you normally play. Pushing forward with that is the easiest way to generally enjoy multiple games without overworking yourself. It's also a really important skill for a fast-moving fighting game world. When we're in a low pace for fighting games, it's not as easy to keep up because other people will be using all of the other skill noted. But if you had that much time, you might want to do that anyway. And you would probably have that time because there's not a bunch of other games to play. But learning to very quickly play whatever you normally play can lead to some really good outcomes when the game industry is full of new games that you don't necessarily want to miss out on, let's say. So, dealing with the carryover and focusing on that aspect of it, particularly in neutral, can be helpful mainly because there are only really like 3 different types of fighting game usually available at the moment. There's this type, which is quite literally the same move, same game as Under Night. If you've ever seen the mods, people just put the characters interchangeably between the 2 games. This is a long, probably very interesting story, but I don't have all of the core aspects of it to be talking about it. Speculatively though, you can assume that someone wanted to make this game a long time ago, and somehow they had to like rebudget and went, you know what, French bread, just take it, just use it. You built the system already, use it for your own game. We spent all this money. You can like pay us back later or something. And therefore we got Under Night, and then later on we got this. It's the same game. Similarly, we get the Street Fighter and the DOA/Tekken, and that more or less covers it. We used to have a specific, this game is very Marvel-like thing, but it's partially lost some favor because it was always janky, like literally always. And technically, they kind of split that genre in half. If you want to play a very raw version of it, there is still, of course, Dragon Ball FighterZ. But overall, about half of the cool combos and half juggles and other systems went in Street Fighter games, and the other half went into these. So pick which half you like. And if you are insistent on playing the combination, which again is janky more so because it's the combination most of the time, then there's still Dragon Ball FighterZ to play if you want. I think that's had a bit of a revival and people are somewhat happy to see it. That's been about 15 minutes, I think, of this. So it really comes down to whether or not Noel is continuing for at least one more or not. It also might be frozen because things are weird. That has been happening lately. That would in itself be the answer, where it's frozen so one of them has to leave, or both of them. No, not entirely. Looks like we get one more before she heads off. And we may end up repeating this next week in one way or another.
Open your magic circuit. Fight.
Aha, we have reached the 3C part of the match. Though probably not right... No, never mind. We have reached the 3C part of the match. The first order strategy, once faced with the standard methodology for MASH getting in your face, is to use more of her moves. But because so much of her advances are actually aerial, it's really easy to use your air invincible 3C to stop, I'd say 90% of it. But this is a little bit hard to get used to sometimes, simply because while the move is good for that purpose, it's also really whiff punishable. So it would feel a little bit counterintuitive to do this. This comes up a lot in games when people are facing off with someone that they have sort of shut down themselves. Especially on an anti-air, because if you've trained yourself at higher levels of fighting games, you just don't expect your opponent to jump or go for high moves enough to think to yourself, I should just expect that in most situations. But it's so easy to get out of most approach vectors without having to do anything that you can still do it. With your main goal being, don't get too behind in flow. If you've got this sort of move, the other thing that often happens, depending on your character, and Noel in particular being good at it, is that the move reaches so far that your opponent still gets hit even if they just try to rush in on you instead and hit buttons, with their only real option to whiff punish you, meaning that you can just stand there and relax for a bit, probably.
Magic circuit. Fight.
Oh no, meter has been used. Our mash is doomed. I'm of course exaggerating. Oh, that goes far. Slightly slow in the combo. But it is that mild charm of not being great at every combo yet that makes people more willing to keep playing these games, honestly. Since it tends to go kind of poorly the other way. For beginners, that is.
Open your magic circuit. Fight.
But I'll let these two have their match in silence now. And we'll expect that the battling person is likely to change around after this match. Or rather, after this set, however it ends.
You win. 首もキップ潰しちゃうぞ。ファイト下シールドカウンターせーの前にこれくらぶサイ着地下シール4だカウンターストレートで慎重打ち払うまだかなこれくらいクイック死ねってのリカバーナイスショットリカバー膝預けっての諦めままだまだダイブ上です急速旋回待ったなしリフトこ下がります魔力全開です行くわよ今シールドバル決めるスキューリそこでマスター下がりますまだまだ当てませやターンバカターンおとなしくしてね諦めませんここです待ってローダえいやダウンター諦めません対空諦めません膝投げてんのまだ生きてるのやだもうまだユアマジック倒れませんファイト前にこれなら飛べキャッチここで動いちゃダメよ慎重にブロックせーのこれならハイアングルトランスファー下がり待ってここでしたビスバッ慎重にブレンです当てます飛べキャッチこれくらい4決める4だまだまだこれなら上がれハイアングルトランスファー対空そうだ急速旋回待ったなし損害想定内ですヒアーカムスはニューチャレンジャー戦闘後サインをいただけないでしょうか。ではこちらも記念写真など1枚オープンユアマジックサーキットファイトここです下がりますそこカウンター4だまだまだシールドここです行きなさい
Apartziel is currently working on, hey, I have neutral buttons. That's probably not the one she should be using, and most likely we'll be seeing a lot of that coming up in the upcoming match, simply because Mash really basically eats that button alive. There are quite a few buttons like that she suffers quite terribly with. But fortunately, Mash is similar to Arcway, just more straightforward and powerhousey, which means that just being in the air and hitting her with lightning when she tries to reach you is effective enough. She does have much more counters to this without being terribly tricky than Arcway does, but she also tends to do these counters from a very defensive position, meaning that you can at least keep her quiet if that's what you really needed to do. And most of the time, the reason that this is required is because you can then use this option to keep yourself moving forward. So whereas zoning Arcway outright is a good plan, you mostly just throw lightning against Mash with Ciel because you want to move forward, but you don't want to have to deal with all your Mash's options for stopping you. If you don't think she's going to let you come forward, throw lightning. If you think she will, move. And obviously, some of the time, you will be wrong about that. But at least you have a basic idea of your main options and the reasons for those options. Except that, again, that button will get eaten alive every time. Most charged moves have this problem, but against defensive characters it's worse because it doesn't reach far enough, and the character you're facing off with has too many good conversions out of the same space. But we're back here. Can I come forward? Yes, no, and if I can, then... Ooh. One of the big problems here is, yeah, that. It's more than likely either that button is set wrong or something. Could be that it's still set wrong. I think she was complaining about that at some point. One of the things that comes up when you play neutral for long enough against a player of this style is that you end up sitting on a lot of meter. Mainly because you're practicing neutral, you're not necessarily looking for big meter conversions. And because of the way this game's damage works, sometimes your big metered conversions don't actually do damage anywhere near worth using the actual meter on them. When you've become really good at the game and have enough strength to turn it into a 3-hit or 3 interaction kill instead, you might want to do this. But a lot of the time, you don't care enough. You can get through quite a lot of stuff in here by just using the meter for neutral interactions and figuring out, well, what does the C version of this move really give me? Many characters, that's a big deal. Power CL seems to be less of that, but she can use it for some really, really fast whiff punishes, which tends to help. Whereas she'll often get beaten based on other buttons simply because those are too slow. She's one of those characters who's constantly rotating between moon energy and standard magic circuit energy because they feed into each other consistently, and she only really cares if she's making hits or not. That's probably what makes her one of the stronger, let's call them footsie characters in the game, because other people are somewhat obligated to use those energy types in specific ways once they get in or to try to get in, whereas she doesn't really care so much about either. She just wants to be accurate enough and not get beat up. This also allows her to keep a little bit spare for getting out of bad situations, but you only need a little bit for that in nearly every case, so it probably doesn't matter as much. I've definitely seen players that know how to use this character in that way, such that she ends up going into her art drive for big damage, but she has so much range that it's not as necessary. Many others need that sort of thing to help with a matchup in specific placement, but so far I haven't seen a situation where Power CL really needs to do this, except maybe against one of the maids who puts too much stuff on the screen. Because while you can throw lightning down a lot, you're not able to advance much while doing this, so your opponent can just kind of ignore you. With enough setup against an opponent who's not trying to get in, who's trying to do their own setups instead, there may be some problems simply because they're just going to wait you out and possibly look for opportunities to shield the lightning instead of actually dealing with it. Shielding is of course a way of dealing with it, but depending on the CL player's skill and timing, it's not necessarily an effective one. Super jumped out, and problem is once again solved. One of the other things that is really useful to CL therefore is to basically constantly use this to get people off her who must attack with really telegraphed moves. While it's possible to use your actual normals to do this, you also have a main option of just, okay, let me hit. Again, it might be not possible due to buttons at the moment, but let me just hit heat and give myself back health while this is going on. Meaning she's quite a high defense character with a lot of capacity for that. In general though, you'd want to do this without specifically being at full meter because this. But it's still useful. Because, once again, keeping control of situations is much higher on this character's priority list than some other things she could be doing. That is a more common and more complex thing in this type of game. There are universal tools that are provided, but every character then turns that tool into a different part of their game plan. Often in the past, this would cause problems because the character with the best way to use the mechanics would end up being the best character. But here, it seems to have been tuned enough that that's not really the case. And there's not really a lot that stops you when your best neutral button is literally shoot the other person. Here's a good example of it. Because the heat hits on both sides, you can use it as a anti-cross-up situation. You don't know which side your opponent is aiming to hit you on, but you also know that they might be going for an empty, or not aiming to hit you at all, or any number of annoying interactions that you really can't deal with from that position. So you hit the button, you regain some health if you were low on health, and you get your opponent off you, often very far off you. So for a character like Ciel who has control of many situations, this turns out to be much more useful, simply because, okay, now you are nowhere near me and you have to do the whole thing all over again. You should still try though, in those positions, to do the same thing all over again, as it will help you keep the opponent away from trying to just use up that time to heal completely, trying to just use it up to set up a situation they like. And if you had enough advantage, flow or skill-wise, that you got them to the point of having to use that, then you should probably go ahead and try to get there again, now that they are in a specific state where that tool is gone. But depending on their amount of moon gauge remaining and how far you had to go, this might turn out to do nothing at all. It's equally useful against Coma because so much of what Coma does, it doesn't necessarily exactly lose to this option, but it requires Coma to play around the option more often. So, this helps more because of the way that Coma does damage. You tend to take a lot of the damage of the other type, like raw, real damage. But that often means that you're going to spend more time getting health back this way. But as you can see there, being tricked into responding to something you shouldn't respond to is pretty dangerous. So, I'm basically saying overall that you get more out of using it more often here than the other way around. But fortunately, it's also one of those matchups where, because of the tendency to take damage in bigger chunks or in situations where you tend to take more of it that way, after the first few interactions, it doesn't really matter if you've used it or not. If you have a lot of meter left over, or rather more meter than you might want to use, chances are, because again of the matchup requirements on both ends, Power Ciel will probably manage to actually get most of the health back. And in this situation, where it's working out, you don't care because 1, you're winning, and 2, he's a character where you often get to use your C Lightning to extend combos, and this is advantageous to you overall simply because he ends up in the wrong places for his own plans. Leaving this almost perfect situation where Seal is at a heavy advantage, but could just activate the same sort of thing anytime, forcing Koma to try to play a style of defense that actually is relatively difficult. If you're really good at confirming from far, it's not so bad. That was the setup either way though. That would probably have required some specific EX move. And I don't really know which one would have been the best option. All of them would technically have been baited. The standard solution in that situation when you see a Koma trying to corner guard you on any character is to super jump immediately. Not because you cannot die, not because Koma cannot catch you, nowhere near is that the case, but Koma's not as good at side switching, so if you're being corner guarded and you super jump, chances are you're at least not going to be corner guarded anymore. But this is different from standard situations where Koma is explicitly trying to hurt you that way. If he's looking like he's trying to actually go for pressure, use your standard pressure responses. But things where corner guard is an option, you definitely want to try super jumping a lot of the time. Yep, he cares nothing at all. Perfectly done, or rather not done. The thing I'm referring to is the fact that at this point of the match, the thing you want to do as CL is often to become very calm and move very little, because you already automatically have so much advantage. Your opponent cannot afford even a single trade, doesn't have enough magic circuit to regain any health, or to use any particularly tricky things, and all of Koma's moon moves are pretty easy to deal with if you are at the correct distance and expecting them. It's very important in fighting games in general to understand when, despite your opponent not being on the ground, you have still achieved your win condition. And when you've got it, don't give up or give much away simply because you will literally give the match away sometimes when you already are winning, if you don't recognize that what you're doing is winning. That was a big bet. I don't think I would have bet that hard. But RCL is still getting used to having the number of options available simply because in games we normally play, there is no equivalent of, I'm just going to super jump out of the corner and everything will be fine. Or, let me just hit this one button and regain 20% of my health while knocking you off me. From the Koma side, that's what you mostly want to do. The same thing as Red Arcwave. Once you've got the situation under control, keep on attacking, because a character with slower moves generally can't stop you from doing as many of the things as you want to do. In this matchup, Type P mostly becomes a grappler, and you just have to figure out what grappler options you really want to be using here. But once you are out of the space, you're worried about two things. One, shielding something and mistiming the shield attack follow-up, because most of the time you need to explicitly delay the follow-up. And secondarily, running out of moon meter. because once he is out of it, it's a lot easier for CL to control situations. Of course, you can go even further and attempt to make your opponent not notice that that's more or less happened, or be so intimidating that they don't think to deal with the problem in any of their other ways. One of the things to get used to in this game, though, is that there are certain characters who just have what we will call freight train moves, and Koma is in fact one of those characters. In fact, half of Koma's moves count as these moves. We're very used to, in multiple games, the idea that we should do something if we see an opening for the opponent to be hit or the opponent to be dealt with. But there are some characters that by design don't work this way. You're not supposed to hit them. You're supposed to get out of the way, because otherwise they would be bad characters. It's their specific goal and nature to put you in those situations as quickly as possible, using one of their usually resource-intensive options. Not everyone has resource-intensive options requirements for this, but the character type doesn't tend to be very balanced unless they're either extremely slow or have these requirements. And since no one is extremely slow in this game at all, you can bet that Koma does have such requirements. And there we go. That was, again, that moment of slipping and not realizing, wait, I've won. It doesn't really matter if you have way more, have about the same health, because once your opponent is out of magic circuit, all that blue health, or rather dark blue health they have, doesn't have a meaning anyway. The key is always, can I beat you in one hit? Because she's good at this one hit business. In fact, in general in this matchup, if Koma is out of magic circuit, CL should mostly just chill out, because there's not a lot of really easy ways for him to gain it. And she tends to have enough control that it works out either way. The fake out? Or was it just entirely incorrect in that front? Hard to say. As always, if you want to join in these in general, we'll probably be here most Tuesdays. And if you're a beginner, you don't really have to worry so much about it, as we don't spend a lot of time practicing the combos in this game. So you will get the style of practice that helps. We will do a lot of effort on making sure we always hit you in situations where you should be hit. Whether or not you will be comboed and therefore killed is a very different question, but you will hopefully, if we're practicing enough, you will at least get hit, and therefore taught, don't do that, because someone who can do all the combos will not only hit you, but also take a third of your health every time they do. Possibly more if they go into pressure from there.
Open your magic circuit. Fight. ここからです。やるの。こうカウンター。それで返します。カウンター。まだ再開します。カウンター。ここからです。形勢ラピッド吹き飛べ。テイル見苦しい。
There's something I've never had a specific reason to mention before, but I should have because it's really important. She is one of the few characters in this game that has the ability to more or less half-screen anti-air you. Now this is really important because a lot of characters, if they try to anti-air you properly and time it even slightly wrong and you went for air shield, you often have an option that results in you landing a hit on that person, other than just the B teleport, which does work, but even in her case might be a little bit weird. But because CL in particular, and I think one other character that's not coming to mind right now, can actually just hit you that way without even leaving the ground, a lot of the options you get out of your own shield don't work terribly well. The BC version sends you flying over her head, and she kind of can just wait on you for this and sometimes even just flatly respond. The B version, she normally has some way of dealing with as a whole, and I believe the air A shield is just like a downward kick for many characters, but you're so far away from her that it doesn't even hit. You can of course do this, then delay, then try for an air move to take you down, but at that point you're probably in a lot of danger. This is part of why she has such good control of those situations. Once you're far enough away from her, you can't even use the very standard way in. But as I was noting before, since you generally don't have to worry about being destroyed by damage, if you do find this game interesting in any way, even if you do spend a lot of time working out damage yourself, we don't really mind. Come on in, beat people up. Because the result should be about the same. The ability to practice the matchup. And whether or not you're doing tons of damage and therefore winning the matches isn't really material to us at all. Well, that whole sequence was, on the technical level, played perfectly, as RCL faced an opponent with no meter, took control long enough to get back her own health, and then forced the opponent to use the meter again to get the situation back. Probably saw an opening there. Or maybe it was just messed up in terms of execution. From the Coma side, a lot of the time what you need to do there is actually run and then super jump. Because while she can respond, running is normally a trigger to make someone think you're coming straight at them, to make them hit a normal button. And while her normals are great, the slower ones don't do a good job of stopping a super jump. Or rather, sorry, the faster ones don't do a good job of stopping a super jump. If she is approaching you, well, you know, deal with that however. But if you find yourself not knowing how to get in, run to the point where you think she can't hit you and then super jump real quick. Or you can air dash, but normally air dash won't take you far enough up in the air to get out of the problem. But again, this is for the desperate situation where Koma has no meter, no way in, too little moon to even think about how to use that properly, etc. He has other tools for this purpose, so don't think I'm saying that, oh no, this is all you can do in this matchup. It's eventually you can get pushed by a good CL player to a specific situation, and it's better to know what your main remaining option in that situation is. You can also, as just shown, go straight up in the air and then come down, but this only works if the opponent is already thinking about different things. Otherwise they'll just play very defensively and your problem will remain. Since she's very hard to whiff punish as well, as you see there. You can also try something that you saw happen before basically by accident, but when a character is already moving, you can just neutral jump, like as in you press the neutral jump, and you will still go somewhat forward. You can also neutral jump and control your vector in the air even a little bit, so that also helps. Well, that was a long sparring session. I believe that means that our mash is back up though, for what might be another one. And possibly a... oh, no, not mash, right. Mash up, CL up. We're probably not keeping this lounge open that much longer as we did have less players, which means that everyone has gotten about the amount of experience that they intended to. And we're going to wait a little while on people fighting me until they've all had more time to poke at Arcade Bot, which is now available on our website. Please forgive any issues you do find on that bot, because it's one of those situations where it felt so easy to make and so easy to put out that due diligence felt somewhat like a waste of time, and it's also one of those situations where you don't really know what to look for, like what mistake could have been made. Normally, it's a matter of, okay, well, maybe if I did this, people would understand it better, but it feels like it should be clear. And because it feels like it should be clear, it's hard to judge what it needs. You can let us know, of course, either through our Twitter _MK_FGC, which you can also use to test, rather to find out whether or not we are playing on any given day. Usually in a tweet that appears at around 7:30 Eastern. We still do have some EU streams occasionally, but the popularity of various games has shifted somewhat. And the ones that do have more popular flows don't tend to be the ones that we have the personal timing for. Which turned out almost to be sad, really. But so it goes. You do what you can with the content that the world gives you. We are now seeing lots more of mash approach, which is a good sign, but CL's 3C is also good, so it doesn't really matter. It is at least somewhat harder to time, so that could be the problem we're seeing here. But even so, as you can see, the damage taken from the style of attack required to beat her 3C isn't great, so you don't necessarily have to be in the situation of fear as much from the CL side. You can count on that move in many situations, simply because it is so incredibly good at anti-airing. It's the whole purpose of its existence. If you don't think it's going to work, then you hit heat and knock your opponent away as they approach, which normally, because of its massive hitbox, tends to save you. Mistiming it is a problem, but the other parts of it aren't so bad. CL in particular has, or rather Powered CL has, the benefit of kind of backflip rolling something when she does hers, which can shift a lot of other things as well, but in some cases it will cause you to get hit when you might not otherwise, so be aware of that. If you want to practice that sort of thing, then I especially suggest trying our Arcade bot, which again is available now on our website 2-mk.org under our Melty bots, or you can just put in Arcade-bot and that'll be it. There's no further requirement there because there's no specific information needed. Lightning bolt. So yes, as noted, we're not necessarily keeping this open that much longer, as it's quite likely that players have had their fill of Melty Blood, or at least Melty Blood in this context, and will probably be going off to either practice more in a different way, or think more about it. After all, thinking is just as important, possibly even reviewing the stream or their own same matches to recognize when they did something they didn't want to do and think of a good training plan for how to work on that. This week in terms of bot releases, it turns out that we never released our CL bot, and I did recently remember why we didn't release our regular CL bot, but there's a good chance that we will get it this week at some point because of this. We also have a Coma prototype that kind of works, and now that the game has been shifted and all of the changes we were expecting to see have been delivered more or less to us, we'll take another look at those bots in the upcoming weeks for those who are interested. But I think I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger if that was 1-1. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.